You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
Here's to the adventure-seeking dog mushers out there. The hundreds of you who stand on the runners dreaming and thinking about the Northern Lights. Of course, there is something else you can do if you've got something to say. Start a podcast with First Paw Media and harness your creative side. Maybe even earn enough money. Enough money to tell yourself, hey, I'm not just a dog musher, I'm a rover. I'm a wanderer. I'm a voyager. I'm an explorer. Visit firstpaw.media. Mush on over today.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hey, Mushing Radio listeners. We mentioned this earlier in our Iditarod coverage, but we set up a way to take questions from our listeners. Please leave a voicemail at 303-578-9881 or send a voice memo at firstpawmedia@gmail.com. Leave your name and where you are calling from. And please, if you want us to use it, keep your questions to under 30 seconds. That's it. Let me give you the information again. 303-578-9881 or a voice memo, firstpawmedia@gmail.com. And we can't wait to hear from you.
So let's kick this off. This is Robert, and we are doing our continued Iditarod coverage here on Mushing Radio on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on firstpaw.media. And check us out on social media there as well. And before we get too deep into this, we want to thank our most recent Patreon members. We have Deb, Katrina, Wendy, Patty, Manny, and Annie. And more importantly, Deb is our first recipient of our superfan tier, where our very own Tony is going to whip up a batch of her very special and famous Idita cookies. Definitely check it out.
Yum!
Over on Twitter. And hopefully you will sign up as well. So thanks to our newest Patreon fans. And without further ado, I am joined tonight by Tony calling in from Kenai, Alaska, and Michelle sitting right next to me at the world headquarters of First Paw Media. Michelle, how's it going?
It's going well, Robert. You know, I was out doing dog training today and I felt a warm wind. That's the first of the season, and that excites me about summer.
And Tony, how's it going down on your neck of the woods?
Going really well. I actually got some chores done in between watching dog teams run up the Yukon, and my dog got to lay in the sunshine all day and we watched the snow melt. So it's been a good day.
And, you know, I should have called today's episode The Mighty Yukon, because that's what everybody's doing. But I think we've titled it exactly appropriate. And we're going to jump into that here in just a little bit. There was a big time story that broke in between the two recordings. So we have a lot going on today. But as usual, let's do a very quick trail report. Let me refresh here. So in first place, we have Ryan. Second place, Richie. Third place, Peter. Fourth place, Jesse. Fifth place, Kelly. And in the rear, we have Greg Vitello, Eric Kelly, Jed Stevenson. And it looks like Jed is the only one in the entire field that has not or is right now taking his mandatory 8 on the Yukon. Then we have Joanna, Bailey, and Gerhardt in the back of the pack. So I guess we might as well jump right into this, Tony. It broke early this morning. I think I woke up or very close to your text where you said that Brent Sass scratched early this morning. What do you know, and what is the latest?
So Brent scratched due to a medical concern. It seemed like a little bit of an emergency when the news broke this morning, but he's doing well. From what we gather from what Brent told Insider this morning when he made the choice to scratch, he actually started the race with 3 broken teeth, that he had just kind of been ignoring that problem. And then he said that he'd been feeling ill for the last few days, and then the run into Eagle Island, which is where he scratched, he said that his mouth, his teeth were just on fire. So he was just really miserable, and the dogs were picking up on that. And then he realized that he was not taking care of his dogs properly or the way that he wanted to. He was skipping some of the things that he normally wouldn't, just because he was so tired, as he hasn't been sleeping well, being sick and having that mouth pain. And so they flew him and his dogs out to Unalakleet. It took 2 trips because he flew with 4 dogs, and then they sent I believe it was 7 other team members to Unalakleet separately. Last I heard, he's still in Unalakleet, and Insider was not sure if they were going to fly the Musher to Nome to get further medical treatment or to fly him back to Anchorage. He does have doctors there in Unalakleet. They've all reported that he is doing well, that he is okay, all vitals are good. So it sounds like whatever was going on is being taken care of. His dogs were all doing great. They were just picking up that their Musher was not feeling well, and so they were starting to, kind of not have their normal rhythm.
Tony and Michelle, mushers are a hardy bunch, but one of the first things that we neglect is our teeth. And I can be one that can speak on that. For folks that follow me on social media, I've been going with some pretty major dental surgery over the last few months, and it harkens back all the way to the mid-90s or so, when I crashed on a dog sled and cracked a couple of teeth, and I'm now at the ripe old age of 52, paying the price dearly for that, for getting a couple of implants in my bottom teeth. So yeah, I know the feeling. I wish Brent well, and it could be a terrible thing to be out there on the trail, because as you guys know, if you've ever had a toothache or tooth pain, it always happens at 3:00 on a Saturday afternoon, and you cannot wait to get to the dentist in the morning. Just imagine if you are in the middle of the Yukon River and it's probably well below zero, and you haven't slept in a week. It can only be compounded. So I can imagine what he's going through. So I hope he's doing well. And as we mentioned, Unalakleet is a major hub for Iditarod. Alaska Airlines flies right into Unalakleet. So if he does not go onward to Nome, I'm sure he will get back to Anchorage and get that taken care of as soon as he can. I know he does live up in Eureka, which is closer to Fairbanks, but I bet he takes care of that right here. Do you agree with that, Tony?
I would hope so, not to be too judgy sounding or anything, because I don't. I'm one of those that, no amount of pleading from anybody is going to get me in a dentist chair until I absolutely need to go. So I totally get why he was just going to muscle through. I've had that situation of broken teeth, especially if they're in the back. It's like, I can chew on my other side. I'll make it through. But I would hope that he'd take care of it sooner rather than later, though it's not that I'm a medical professional or expert in any imagination, but considering he wasn't feeling well, he looks to me like, if he's not feverish, he's just really, really sick looking in the interview. And so my guess is something's getting infected in that mouth area, which means that they're going to have to go through a course of antibiotics before they can do any sort of surgery.
And am I not mistaken here, Tony, but wasn't it a toothache or tooth problems that that Lance Mackey had on a race, and he found out that at that point when he went to the doctor that it was cancer? Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, one of his first Iditarods, he thought it was a toothache, went to the dentist. I think the story goes, he was just going to ask him to pull it because that's the cheaper option. And they found that he had throat cancer instead. So I doubt that's what we're seeing here. But yeah, it's again, like you said, mushers, they're going to ignore their medical needs ahead of their dog's needs every time. So they're more focused on the four-legged team members than they are themselves.
Right. So we all wish Brent well, and hopefully he gets better. And remember, guys, he is the reigning 2022 champ. So it was big news to see that this morning. So let's jump into a couple other stories. I heard today that they may have to reroute the trail off of the sea ice, which a lot of teams are getting pretty dang close to in the next, between now and when we record again. What's the news with that, Tony?
So that was the other story that Insider was trying to get accurate information on this morning when news broke on Brent Sass's scratch. Bruce Lee was sent pictures from a friend that lives out near Shaktoolik, saying that, hey, there's no sea ice out here. It's open water here on the Norton Sound. There's not been any updates on the trail since then, other than Insider continually saying we're waiting to hear back from those race officials that are out there. But it sounds like if there's any concern or question about the stability of the sea ice, if it's even out there, that they're going to reroute and take the dry land trail, which they've done in the past. I want to say 2014 was a year that they didn't run across the sea ice and they ran around it. I could be wrong on the year, but it's happened before. It just means that your strategy plays a little bit differently because it's a few extra miles. But it's completely doable. It's not something that, they have to stall the race while they put in a trail. Those trails are used quite frequently by villages, so it shouldn't be a big problem logistically. It's just going to change up how some of these mushers play the next couple of days.
Next up on our list is Ryan Reddington wins the Fish First Award, I believe it's called, presented by Bristol Bay Salmon, if I'm not mistaken there. What's up with that?
The Bristol Bay Native Corporation's award that they sponsor every year. Ryan Reddington was first into CalTag at around 5:15 p.m. today. Or no, I'm sorry, that's when he left. He got in around 12:47 p.m. today. And he was awarded with this gorgeous wooden plaque that's in the shape of a salmon with a musher and his, I believe, lead dog engraved on the side of the fish. He's also awarded with $2,000. And then this summer, they will be delivering him 25 pounds of fresh Bristol Bay caught salmon, red salmon. So a big award. It was nice to see a Reddington get to take that prize. And he's, like I said, already back out on the trail after 4.5-hour rest. And he'll be headed for the next at least 10 hours to Unalakleet to be the first on the coast, hopefully.
Yeah, and I can't wait to talk about our question of the day here in just a minute. So let's talk about Nick and Greg. Last night we talked quite a bit about Greg Vitello. He was one of our Musher profiles along with his son Bailey, and we talked about is he still being competitive out there? He's still in the Red Lantern position, and he's making his way, but it's my understanding that he had a heck of a long break this morning or this afternoon, whichever it was. What do you know about Greg?
Well, we actually have breaking news, Robert. I just saw the Iditarod post a press release. Rookie musher Greg Vitello scratched at 3:34 p.m. today at the Iditarod checkpoint. which was in the best interest of his team, Greg contacted race marshal Mark Nordman through a third party and asked for the Iditarod trail sweeps to escort him and his dog team back to Iditarod. Greg and his team are fine and will be transported off the trail by Iditarod Air Force. So I think that answers our question. It sounds like he took a 10-hour rest in the checkpoint of Iditarod, made it about 5 or 6 miles, I think, is what I said to you earlier in the day when we discussed this, and then just seemed to stop and stall. And that's always a sign of not necessarily trouble in like the dun, dun, dun sense, but more like the trouble as in done, done, done sense. He was running a team of dogs that, you know, it was a little questionable whether or not they were going to have the mental fortitude to go the entire way. And we were starting to see signs of that in the last few days. So it's not surprising. It's very disappointing, though, because I know Greg wanted to finish, you know, and especially since his son is still out there and still kind of kicking butt. So bummed for Greg, but glad that the team is doing well.
Yeah, and that's your typical press release in the best interest of the dogs, and of course that's what most of us care about. Of course, we care about the humans as well, but the dogs can't say, "Hey, we're done." The only way that they do that is they just pretty much say, "We're not going to do this anymore. We're going to stop right here, and we're going to take a rest, whether you like it or not." And there's all sorts of stories about that in Iditarod history, and it's definitely something that we could jump into quite a bit, but I think that's a story for another day. So that also brings up Nick Petit. Evidently, he had a heck of a long rest, probably unplanned. What was up with that one?
Yeah, he took a rest between Eagle Island and the checkpoint of Caltag. He left out of Eagle Island. Let me pull that up real quick. Eagle Island at 4:18 this morning, and 4:28 this morning, and he's still not into Caltag. He took either a 9 or 10 hour rest in between the checkpoint, which, I mean, if you're planning on blowing through Caltag and breaking up the run from Eagle Island to Unalakleet, a rest there wouldn't necessarily be too concerning. It's the fact that he stayed for as long as he did. It doesn't seem like the normal rest time. Now, that could mean that Nick is just trying to do something out of the box, which is very Nick Petit style, or it could signify that his dogs needed a longer rest. He was resting most of the day, which maybe it was just too warm for the dogs. But we've also seen him taking rests in different areas that we didn't expect, like taking his 24 in Nikolai, for example. So there's a little bit of question, at least in my mind, is this not going the same way as the Yukon 550, where he did have to go from racing mode to adventure/camping mode towards the end.
Yeah, and I know earlier in the coverage, we talked about the mandatory gear that every musher has to carry in their sled, and that includes extra dog food, and that's one of the reasons why. So if these teams shut down outside of checkpoints, they have to have food to feed them. And if you're doing really long rests like this, when we're talking 8, 10, or 12 hours, you're definitely going to have to feed your dogs on the trail. So it is very commonplace to have that extra food and extra fuel for your cooker and all that sort of stuff, because these things happen. I've been there and done that before on expeditions and mid to longer distance races where my dog teams will shut down, and you have to do whatever you can to sort of spark that fire, if you will. But Michelle has our canine science tip of the day. Michelle, you want to talk a little bit about sleep deprivation in dogs. We hear a lot about that on the Iditarod Trail, about sleep deprivation with the mushers, and we talked last night about Richie Deal just looking exhausted when his family met up with him at one of the checkpoints, and he was there with his little baby, and it looked like he was just ready to fall over any second. But what about sleep deprivation in dogs, Michelle?
Well, I'm wondering if you want to talk about Eddie Burke first, because it's going to play right into my section here. So if you'd like to talk about Eddie Burke falling asleep at the wheel, so to speak, I think that might be a good time to do so.
Yeah, let's do that. So we talked about human sleep deprivation, and we sure did see it earlier this morning at some point. It looks like Eddie Burke, our Rookie of the Year contender, fell asleep at the wheel, so to speak, and fell off the sled and walked for quite a ways. And it looks like he hitched a ride with a couple of mushers. I think Christian Turner was one of them from the CV kennels there, and he finally made his way back to the checkpoint and got his team back. But it's important to note here, Tony, that just because he had that outside assistance, that is not a breaking of the rules, is it?
No, it's not. The fact that, Iditarod Insider was there with snow machines to actually reconnect him with his dog team that had run into the checkpoint of Eagle Island, which is where they were supposed to go anyway, does not disqualify him from the race. Now, if he had entered Eagle Island first without his dog team, that's a different story. But the fact that the dogs made it without him does not disqualify him, nor does it mean that he's disqualified because of the outside assistance, because there is a clause in that rule that if for some reason you get separated from your dog team, everything else goes out the window. It's dogs first. You've got to retain that dog team. And so you can use outside assistance in that way to get the dog team. Now, if you were to use that outside assistance to then get the dogs to follow you into the checkpoint or something like that, that's a different story. But just being able to reconnect with your dog team, that's not considered a disqualifiable offense.
And Tony, I'm trying to think of the story several years ago, and I want to think it was Seth Barnes that fell asleep at the wheel, if you will, and he had one of those trail dragger sleds, so the type of the sled that has that seat and, little caboose, if you will, on the back of your sled. And it's my understanding that he fell asleep, and the name may not be right, but he fell asleep and ended up between the runners there where the brake and drag mat are. And this may be totally wrong, but I guess he had on his iPod and he was listening to Kid Rock or something like that. And that's what finally woke him up. And the dogs were just trotting away, and he woke up to the music and figured, oh my goodness, I fell asleep here. And my goodness, I got to jump back on the sled. Do I have at least some of that story right? Do you recall?
I don't recall who it was. And they all kind of blend together because this is not something out of the norm. I actually had someone message me earlier today asking about it, and I was like, you'd be surprised just how many times this happens. We've seen video. I can't remember which journalist it was. I want to say it was Kyle Hopkins from Anchorage Daily News, has a video of sitting there on the trail waiting for teams to come by, and there's Jeff King, and he's asleep, definitely asleep, sitting down on his old man sled, that chair, that caboose on the sled, and he's totally out. And then you've got the story of Linwood Fiedler from just a few years ago, who fell asleep, fell off his sled. The dogs made it in the checkpoint, and nobody knew where Linwood was. So definitely something that happens far more often than I think we even hear about, unless there's a journalist around to capture some of that footage.
And if you've been listening to our show all off season, you've probably heard my own sleep deprivation story about seeing a pterodactyl on the Tustamina 200 trail. If you have not, definitely check out that episode. I don't recall which one that was, Tony, but I know we talked pretty in depth with that one. I did see, I think it was on your post, Lisa Mackey, that's Jason Mackey's wife, said that Eddie should have a tug line wrapped around him and attached to the handlebars. And Michelle, I don't recall who it was. You might know, Tony, but we saw somebody leaving from the restart with what looked like really long drag lines, or old crap lines, as we call them. And they look like horse rope, the type of rope that you would use to work with horses. that could be the reason why. So you could tie yourself to the sled, either going down through some scary sections, or if you know that you're going to fall asleep, I guess a good way to do that is just sort of anchor yourself in. Do you remember who that was, Michelle? If not, Tony, do you?
I honestly thought it was Eddie.
Oh, it could have been. I don't know.
I'm not even sure because, they were going by and I was mostly looking at the dogs. I mean, I married a musher, so I wasn't out there hunting for one. I was only looking for the dogs.
Tony, you probably got pictures of all the mushers. I believe that they were blue and white rope. Do you recall who that was?
I don't recall. There are several sleds every year that seem to have
purple and gray
those lines. So.
Yeah.
So maybe we will find that tomorrow in Tony's pictures, and we will report back on that, because that would be a cool bookend to this story, if you will, because I bet that's what that was for sure.
I want to say this too, Robert. You had one tied to the sled when you were training the kids how to do longer distance mushing races. Especially Nicole, you had her have one on there. It wasn't tied to her, but it was within her reach that if she did fall off, she could grab it rather quickly. And if I recall, she may have had to use it when she ran the Denali Highway her final year doing junior Iditarod.
Yep. And another musher tip, if you will, a lot of people, I know Michelle and Nicole included, use a neckline, and they put their hand through the neckline onto the driving bow. And that's not necessarily because they may fall asleep on a training run, but in case they crash, their hand is still there attached to the sled.
And possibly broken in the crash because of that reason, but it is a fail-safe.
It is a fail-safe. So that's another thing that they could do if they know that they're getting pretty tired. So Michelle, let's jump into our canine science tip here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, Eddie requires 7 to 8 hours of sleep, just as all of us human beings require. And I just got to say, we're 7 days into this, and that's not including the ceremonial start and all of the partying that was going on. So let's just call it 8 days, right? And he has not had a good night's sleep or a significant amount of sleep, for that matter, in at least 8 days. And so it should be expected by the time they hit the Yukon, the trail is flatter. The trail is a whole lot more boring. From what I've been told by a lot of mushers that have ran the Yukon River, it's boring. And so that's where you are going to fall asleep thinking that you're quote unquote safer, because you're not on that more technical part of the trail. And I just got to say, tie yourself on, at the least, so that you don't tip over and fall off. But interestingly enough, dogs can suffer from sleep deprivation as well. And there's been research done on Iditarod dogs specifically, but more so with our own personal dogs. And it's interesting because dogs need between 8 and 13 and a half hours of sleep every day, with an average sleeping just under 11 hours. And I think that we can all attest to the fact that Stitch probably sleeps closer to 20 hours, but I'll leave that up to Tony to explain to us later. But the point of the matter is, you guys, is dogs suffering sleep deprivation is a real thing, and it happens to them on Iditarod just as it does to the musher. And a lot of times I'm wondering, because this is not included in the research, but I think it would be viable for somebody to do research on, and that is actually discover if the dogs that are coming into checkpoints that appear lethargic and or are then deemed unfit to continue for various other reasons, it could simply be something as minimal as needing to catch up on some Z's. What do you guys think?
I agree. I know that sled dogs are a whole different animal than the pet dog, and there's been a whole lot of research. And being in a doctorate program, I've read my share of scholarly journals, so I enjoy reading that kind of boring stuff. And I would bet that Arlie Reynolds, a world-renowned researcher and veterinarian, probably has looked into this, if not Heather Hewson from back east, I believe at Cornell University, they've probably looked at that in sled dogs. And even though their metabolism and just their whole makeup is different than a pet dog, I would bet that that dogs do suffer from sleep deprivation, just like our golden retrievers and Labradors and little dogs like Tony has and the nine. So yeah, I think it's a very important topic because we always hear in these press releases in the best interest of the dogs. And most often that means that, they're just wiped out from all those hours on the trail. They've worked too hard, sore shoulders or whatever, and they just don't have the dog power, if you will, to continue. But it could be they're just not getting enough rest. They're not eating well. They have a stomach bug, all sorts of things. So it could be a myriad of factors, but I like that sleep deprivation idea as well, Michelle.
Yeah, I just want to close out this segment with, I was reading all of the dog litter names that people were coming up with. So fabulous. I don't remember seeing anybody holler out the Seven Dwarfs because Sleepy would be a good name.
Sleepy and Dopey. I'm sure that there is a sled dog crew out there named that, which is a great segue into our next segment. Our question of the day last night, Tony, was, what would you name a litter of sled dog puppies? And my goodness, I was reading these starting to come in like at 5 o'clock this morning. I think we had 45 or so responses on your Facebook and Twitter page. And my gosh, I got a lot of good ideas for litter names. And I know Michelle and I have talked. We're not going to have any more litters.
We are not. People take notes.
Yes.
We are not. But I liked Barb Reddington's. I mean, she gave us a whole bunch of names.
She did.
They were so cool.
And they stuck with the theme. They really went all at it. Tony, what do you have for us on some of these litter names?
Oh, there were so many good ones. We had one that was toys like Lego, Rubik, Simon, Easy Bake, Weeble. They wobble, but they don't fall down. Then we had percussion instruments and Rogue and Wraith Squadron. If you are a Star Wars fan like I am, before Disney took over and totally ruined the expanded universe, there was this book series called Rogue Squadron, and it followed some of the minor characters from the movies. So I'm a huge fan of that one. That would be one of mine. Of course, I had some followers who know I love Disney, so they came up with Disneyland related themes like attractions and snacks. I really liked one. Someone came up with the theme of purple things. And so, you have lavender, periwinkle, tulip. It was they had Barney in there, Barney the purple dinosaur.
The best name in that,
so I liked
the
that
best,
one too.
The best name in the purple group was Bruce.
Bruce.
Right? For the biggest dog, for the biggest puppy in the litter. That was the rule for that one. Mm-hmm. There were some that I can't repeat because they're not work or family friendly, which would totally work for someone like Leb Schwartz or Rob Cook for their kennel names. As we know, they love to have some of those interesting ones just to hear those lead dogs get named at the starting line. Had a few that suggested Iditarod Mushers, which is something Nick Petit has done several times. Lots of people chose a legal theme to use like terminology from the courtrooms. That was interesting. Just so many great ones. We had some that said the Twitter handle team, and they went with ugly dog Twitter names. One was, may I present the Bones I've Broken litter. So yeah, lots of good names.
Lots of good ones. I really like that legal theme, and I think that they had brief, motion, appeal, judge, lawyer, something like that. Definitely cool.
I know for a fact we've got a couple in our kennel that we could name criminal and misdemeanor.
For sure. So that was a cool question. But guys, I'm sure you're probably screaming at your phone or your computer screen right now, because we usually do another segment before we get into the question. So we're going to save our question of the day for tonight for just a second. We have to talk about our musher of the day, and it is KattiJo Deeter. I think all of us would agree, one of our favorite mushers out there this year. And we're looking forward to talking about KattiJo. Michelle, what do you know from the bio?
Well, what I know from the bio is KattiJo has the most sponsors I've ever seen in any musher's bio ever. So good
because she's
job.
so loved.
Good job, KattiJo, in gathering all the sponsors on the planet to help you get across that finish line. That is really awesome. She could share some of the love, but I think that she has done a great job. A lot of these look like family members. So kudos to all of the KattiJo sponsors and fans. But, you know, KattiJo Deeter is originally from Northwest Wisconsin, as I'm sure a lot of you know. She graduated from UW La Crosse and then relocated to Alaska in 2010. Her first job was doing a dog sledding tour in Juneau, where she met Jeff and fell in love. I always like to say we fall in love with the dogs first, gentlemen. It's not all about you. But, you know, KattiJo has, it says here, she has the unique distinction of being one of the only mushers to ever run all the way to Nome, but not be considered an official finisher, which is so terrible. But she is sharing here, several of us mushers got trapped in a terrible ground blizzard between White Mountain and Safety. Some wind gusts must have been nearly 80 miles an hour. She says her sled was getting blown over and somersaulted off the trail down the side of the mountain. Eventually, we had to call for help because we couldn't make any forward progress, and it was a dangerous situation for us and our dogs. She says Jeff and her were taken by snow machine assistance 3 miles ahead down the trail to the Topcock shelter cabin. And at one point, there were 4 of them in the cabin with 32 dogs. They spent 24 hours together. I'm sure that they all will never forget that moment in time. She did threaten to move herself and the dogs to Hawaii after that situation. But as we all know, moving to Hawaii is very difficult as a dog musher, except for Robert. I told you today, we can go run dogs on Mauna Kea.
I saw that.
I mean, come on. They're having a blizzard at the top of the mountain there on the Big Island. I say let's go do it.
Let's do it.
All right. So KattiJo is super awesome, super friendly, very approachable dog musher, and we wish her well. They are not getting stuck in a blizzard. They are not getting lost on the sea ice this year. She is going to cross that Burl Arch.
And I have a thing or two to say about KattiJo and her husband, Jeff, in just a second. But what do you know, Tony?
Well, I know that she may not be getting lost this year or blown off a mountain, but she has broken her sled more than I think any other musher that I can think of in history, and still keeps going because she just had to fix her sled again last night. But I did get in contact with her husband, Jeff, and he was able to give me the answers that I was looking for. Of course, I asked him, what's one thing that you want fans to know about what makes Katie tick? And he said, more than anything, Katie loves to travel. That's the underlying reason for racing, but she's very competitive, so it's a good blend. And then I asked, what is one thing that she always has to have in the sled bag that's not mandatory gear? And he said a good playlist and a few quality audiobooks. So he was very short, sweet, and to the point, but got that point across. And I love listening to Katie talk. I got to sit with her. I don't think she remembers this, but I remember it. we were waiting for Jeff to come in to Nome in 2019. We were both in the same hotel, and the internet was like down for the entire city of Nome, so we could not get even a signal with our phones to watch the tracker. So we just had to kind of sit there and wait until, you know, either we could see a crowd forming to cheer him in or whatnot. But she was just so funny because she was like, I need to know, I need to be able to post it on our Facebook page. And here we were just sitting there waiting like the good old days we imagined. So she's just really fun. I enjoy listening to her and following along in her journey.
So several years ago, I had both KattiJo and Jeff on Mushing Radio, and I believe it was right around his first Iditarod, and we were talking all about their journey and sort of having their dream fulfilled there with their cabin in the woods and all of that. And I had to remark when I was on the show just how impressed I was with their graphics on their Facebook page and their their website. And their website is much different than it was way back then. And if I remember correctly, a friend of theirs is the person that does all of the graphics, hand-drawn graphics. And you'll see on their website, blacksprucedogsledding.com, you'll see that black spruce there and the dog that looks like the Yukon Quest logo. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm sure if you jump around in the website, you will see some of those really cool graphics. But also, as Michelle mentioned, they are a sled dog tour operator up near Fairbanks. And I'm looking at their website right now. They have 884 reviews on TripAdvisor for their dog sledding tours. They are ranked number 2 out of 93 for outdoor activities in Fairbanks. And they say that they are ranked number 1 in Fairbanks on TripAdvisor. Tony and Michelle, I know a heck of a lot of us dog mushers do tours for a way to make money in the off season or even during the snow season by providing these tours. But I don't think very many of us have that big of a review following on TripAdvisor. Have you ever seen anything like that, Michelle?
No, but I'm wondering if they're getting any of Tony's cookies just to get on those TripAdvisor reviews. They've got to be padding that somehow. But no, in all seriousness, when you provide people with a great experiential experience, right, where they're out there doing it's a form of ecotourism. And when you do it the right way, you're going to get people that will volunteer to put a review on there for you.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And definitely check out their website, guys. Whoever's taking those photos, if it's Jeff or KattiJo, they're definitely doing that right. Do you have anything else to say about their tour business, Tony? Have you heard anything else through the grapevine about what they're doing up there?
I haven't, other than to know that they are one of the most popular, or, at least they always have really great reviews. They have an energy and they have an excitement about what they're doing, their kennel. You see that in their social media posts. Katie and Jeff both do a very good job, depending on who's racing and who's at home doing the tours. So it's a team effort all the way with them, and I think that just comes across, and it's genuine. So I think that's where a lot of the love comes from.
And she's doing very well on the trail right now. At my last refresh, she is dead middle of the pack at 16. She's working her way to Caltag there. And I don't know this stat, maybe you do, Tony, but it says 9.23 miles an hour. Is that cumulative or the last ping? If it's cumulative, she's blazing down the trail at 9.25 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're looking at the race standings, and that is just factoring in how long it took them to get from the last checkpoint that they left to the most recent checkpoint that they got to the last one they left. And so typically why hers is so fast is she probably didn't camp along the trail. That's why you'll see some of the ones that are up on the leader, in the leader standings, like Jesse Holmes. He camped out on the trail, but his speed shows him going 4.85. That's not actually accurate, but it's not taking into account the time that they rest on the trail.
Well, one way or another, if you have a dog team that's going 9 miles an hour, whether you're factoring in rest or not, and this is just another musher perspective, 9 miles an hour for a long distance team, especially this far into the race, that is very impressive. And it looks like just a couple of others, of course, not factoring in those rest times, is going above 9 miles an hour. So way to go, KattiJo. We hope that you do very well. And just one more part of that story, didn't Jeff sort of sacrifice his own race last year to run with his wife? That's the story, isn't it, right, Tony?
Not really. It's the other way around.
Oh.
His team got sick. He wasn't feeling well either. So when his race blew all to poop, then he decided to stick with KattiJo. So they ran together, but it was because his race wasn't going according to plan. So instead of trying to push the dogs through it, he just decided, you know what, let's just run with Katie. And it's probably a good thing that happened, because she would have probably had a different outcome mentally once she got to that Topcock Hills and those windstorms that hit them. That she had Jeff there with her, I think she said, helped her out immensely, because at least she could scream at him and tell him that they were never doing this again.
Well, that leads to that quote that we mentioned in previous episodes, something about tough women in Alaska. If the husband had to sort of say, hey, I need the help of my wife here, that's definitely putting equal footing on both sexes of the race there. So I guess I should ask, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm sure you do, but is that the particular shelter cabin where they got in trouble for the dogs in the cabin itself, or is that somewhere else?
Nope. No, that was Michelle and Milla, and that was out of Elam, not out of White Mountain.
Okay, so it was a different scenario altogether. And I know that there was a lot of staying in those shelter cabins last year because of those storms that were rolling through for several days. It was ongoing for sure. So let's jump into our last segment, since we already covered the question for last night, which was the litters of sled dog puppies. Right about now, guys, the Mushers are going to be making their way into Unalakleet, and there is an Iditarod tradition. There is a pizza place there called Peace on Earth, and it's my understanding, and I have not done this, but I'm sure Tony can speak on it a little bit longer than I, that you can call into this pizza restaurant and put in a pizza order for your favorite musher and tell them, hey, Nick likes pepperoni and sausage and extra cheese, and they will whip that up for him, and I think they will deliver it to him at the checkpoint. So before I turn it over to you, Tony, the question of the day is, what is your favorite topping on pizza? And it just so happens that Michelle and I whipped up a couple of homemade pizzas right before airtime. And on my pizza, I had garlic, peppers, sweet and green, onions, mushrooms, Italian sausage, pepperoni, and cheese. Michelle, what'd you have on yours?
Mine are never as fun as yours. I had pepperoni, mushroom, and sausage. Pretty basic.
So, Tony, tell us about the Peace on Earth. But before you do, what is your favorite topping on pizza?
Oh my gosh, I'm so boring. I prefer, if it's a really good pepperoni pizza, that's all I need. Otherwise, I kind of like the meat lovers with the pepperoni and the sausage and salami. I'm more of a carnivore than anything else when it comes to pizza. So, but if we're talking Moose's Tooth Pizza there in Anchorage, which is not my favorite pizza place, and I know that's kind of sacrilege, but it's the truth. But they have, during Iditarod, it's called the Shishmaref Cannonball, which is a nod to Herbie Nayakpuk, and it's peppers and pepperoni, and I want to say sausage was on there, but it was reindeer sausage. So that was really, really good. But yeah, so as far as Peace on Earth Pizza, not only will they take your order over the phone no matter where you are in the world, but they will also, if you want to have them scroll out a message to your favorite musher, they'll write it on the inside of the pizza box for you.
Aw.
I like it, and that's ongoing. And I wonder, and I'm sure this happens a lot, especially for the more famous or followed mushers. I wonder if they put a cap on it. So if people are sending Jesse Holmes pizzas, I don't imagine they would send out 24 pepperoni pizzas to Jesse, would they?
I don't know. I do know that if the musher either misses the pizza by some chance, like it's a Dallas TV who's just blowing through there and it takes them only a minute to grab their stuff and go, then my understanding is the media and the volunteers get the pizza. So it does not go to waste. So.
I like it. And I know Michelle knows this little fun fact about me, but I'm a huge pizza fan. I have had literally pizza in every state in the United States and a couple of other countries. And we're heading to Italy in 2024 for that first slice of Italian pizza. But I am wanting to do Iditarod or some type of expedition for the mere fact of having a slice of this Peace on Earth pizza. But I have to say, you talked about Moose's Tooth, and that is world famous pizza. Another kind of fun fact, it is the highest grossing pizza restaurant in the United States. And that comes from their website. So they must sell a heck of a lot of pizza there at Moose's Tooth. But my favorite pizza at the moment was just a couple of weeks ago in Seattle at Delfino's Chicago style pizza. It was wonderful, wasn't it, Michelle?
It was. And what a cute little find.
It was just a little teeny pizza restaurant in the University Village or University Center or whatever it's called.
It was tucked away, though, in a corner where it wasn't as noticeable.
Yes, and it was. So, guys, the question of the day, what is your favorite toppings on pizza? It could be boring, like just plain old cheese, or it could be pepperoni and sausage, or it could be some kind of elaborate deal like they do at Moose's Tooth. I know we just had one there with our buddy Jeremy, and it had all sorts of stuff on it, including shaved steak. And that was one of the best pizzas I've ever had there. So Tony will post that question.
Her mouth is watering right now.
Tony will post that question on social media right after we air, and it will be tagged, I did a question. So definitely check that out and answer away. Because I know, Tony, you've been asking folks what they're going to put on the pizzas to the mushers. Is that right?
Yeah, the Ugly Dogs, they do this every year. They try to have this spreadsheet where they make sure that every musher doesn't get more than another. They make sure everyone is covered. So this year, while I've been asking mushers' families for the little insight on our musher of the day, I've also been asking them the bonus question of what do they like on their pizza, and the excitement of the family members and the friends that are running their social media pages when they're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool that they're going to buy them a pizza, has been really exciting. But it has destroyed my soul to find out so many of my favorite mushers like to put the abomination of pineapple on their pizza.
Ah, my goodness.
Well, I'm just gonna make it worse on everyone. I want to know if the pizza at the
Peace on Earth,
if they make a dessert pizza, then I'd like to try the dessert pizza.
Some of those are pretty good, like the s'mores pizza or kind of the cookie pizzas and all that. Definitely try that out. So, guys, answer the question. We look forward to hearing your responses. So, like we always do, we're going to go with Tony first. Did we miss anything, or are there any other stories you want to report on?
No, I think we covered everything, which I'm shocked because it was such a long list.
I agree. Michelle?
I think we finally hit our rhythm.
We're mid into this. We're heading into week 2. We have another full week of our podcast, and that leads me into my final segment. If you have not already, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening, and tell your family and friends how they can listen too. Maybe they can become a rabid listener just like you. If you are so inclined and you want some of Tony's famous Idita cookies, head on over to patreon.com/firstpawmedia, and she will whip up a batch specifically for you. Now, it will be after Iditarod before we get those out, but she promises they will be freshly made and made with care in specifics for you. So that is patreon.com/firstpawmedia. There is a level that will require you to get those cookies amongst other very cool perks, including access to our world famous after show that we're calling the Gangline. And if you will, please leave us a review on wherever you're listening to this podcast. That really helps us out to be found. And lastly, we will be back on tomorrow around this time to talk about the third of the race, and that is the coast and then onward to Nome. I think a good majority of their teams will be either in Unalakleet or on their way out. And it's a whole different race out that way. And I always like talking about that, not because it's getting closer to the finish, but there's a lot going on that second or third of the race for sure. So until next time, we will see you then. Goodbye.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your host is Robert Forto. Our producers are Michelle Forto, Alex Stein, and Tony Ryder. Our executive producer is Robert Forto. Created for DogWorks Radio and First Paw Media.
She's having major contractions and everything, and she wouldn't go to the hospital because she was convinced the doctor wouldn't let her watch the football game.
Okay, so I have to know why the hell your name isn't JJ. For Joe and Jerry. For the love of Christ. What was she thinking?
Because she promised my grandpa that she would name her firstborn child after him, and the doctors told her that I was going to be a boy, so she couldn't disappoint Grampy. So I'm Antonia Michelle, and he was Anthony Michael.